I don't know.
I'd shart.
Probably pass out. What was that noise?
My wheezing?
Was that you?
Like making the whistling noise?
It was like a really high pitched, like, it sounded like someone going, ah!
Oh, I wheezed. I don't have my... Jordan lost my inhaler, so I've been wheezing really bad for a while now.
You left your lungs here.
Yeah, I can't find it. If you ever just hear me wheezing, yeah, I'm dying. Welcome back, everybody.
Hello.
I hope you were enjoying the 31 Days of Halloween. Are you enjoying the 31 Days of Halloween?
Of course.
It's August. It's nowhere near Halloween yet, but every day's Halloween in my book. I am still dealing with allergies and I sound like a little boy, but today we are going, this is Carly's idea, so you know what? You explain what we're doing.
So we are going to read the Grimm Brothers versions of two popular like Disney stories. My boyfriend's actually been into like the whole Grimm Brothers thing, and so I had been watching some TikToks about like the Grimm Brothers stories, and since it's the 31 Days of Halloween and a lot of people dress up as like princesses and Disney characters, I was like, we should do a couple of like Disney stories but Grimm Brothers.
And I had never heard about this before in my entire life until she was like, hey, we should do this. And I was like, okay.
Sure.
I'll be reading the first one, and if my voice gives out and you hear Carly pick up in the middle of it, then you know why. I just talked a lot. I just talked a lot for like the last 2 hours. My voice is gonna start going out at some point and I don't know when.
And my story's a lot longer than hers, so hopefully she can get through it.
But the thing is, you can't read.
Well, we'll be here in an hour.
Stay tuned for the blooper reel on Patreon. This is the Snow White, this is the Snow White. This is Snow White, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. I really hope I don't start sounding like Chills, because Chills with a nasally prepubescent boy voice probably wouldn't sound very appetizing to listen to.
Appetizing?
Appealing to hear me tell you guys a story. It was the middle of winter, and the snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, and a queen sat at her window working, and her embroidery frame was of ebony. And as she worked, gazing at times out on the snow, she pricked her finger, and there fell from it 3 drops of blood on the snow. And when she saw how bright red it looked, she said to herself, "Oh, that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the embroidery frame." Not very long after, she had a daughter, with a skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony, and she was named Snow White. And when she was born, the queen died. After a year had gone by, the king took another wife, a beautiful woman, but proud and overbearing, and she could not bear to be surpassed in beauty by anyone. She had a magic-looking glass, and she used to stand before it, and look at it and say, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the looking glass would answer, "You are fairest of them all." And she was contented, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. Now, Snow White was growing prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as day, far more so than the queen herself. So one day, when the queen went to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" it answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White, fairer is than you." This gave the queen a great shock, and she became yellow and green with envy, and from that hour, her heart turned against Snow White, and she hated her. And envy and pride, like ill weeds, grew in her heart higher every day, until she had no peace day or night. At last she sent for a huntsman, and said, "Take the child out into the woods, so that I may set eyes on her no more. You must put her to death, and bring me her heart for a token." The huntsman consented, and led her away. But when he drew his cutlass to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep, and to say, "Oh dear huntsman, do not take my life. I will go away into the wild wood, and never come home again." And as she was so lovely, the huntsman had pity on her, and said, "Away with you then, poor child." For he thought the wild animals would be sure to devour her. and it was as if a stone had been rolled away from his heart when he spared to put her to death. Just at that moment, a young wild boar came running by, so he caught and killed it, and taking out its heart, he brought it to the queen for a token. And it was salted and cooked, and the wicked woman ate it up, thinking that there was an end of Snow White. Now, when the poor child found herself quite alone in the wild woods, she felt full of terror, even of the very leaves on the trees, and she did not know what to do for fright. Then she began to run over the sharp stones and through the thorn bushes, and the wild beasts after her, but they did her no harm. She ran as long as her feet would carry her, and when the evening drew near, she came to a little house, and she went inside to rest. Everything there was very small, but as pretty and clean as possible. There stood the little table, ready laid, and covered with a white cloth and 7 little plates, and 7 knives and forks and drinking cups. By the wall stood 7 little beds, side by side, covered with clean white quilts. Snow White, being very hungry and thirsty, ate from each plate a little porridge and bread, and drank out of each little cup a drop of wine, so as not to finish up one portion alone. After that she felt so tired that she lay down on one of the beds, but it did not seem to suit her. One was too long, another too short, but at last the 7th was quite right, and so she lay down upon it, committed herself to heaven, and fell asleep. That sounds like the frickin' Three Bears. When it was quite dark, the masters of the house came home. They were 7 dwarfs, whose occupation was to dig underground among the mountains. When they had lighted their 7 candles, and it was quite light in the little house, they saw that someone must have been in, as everything was not in the same order in which they left it. The first said, "Who has been sitting in my little chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating from my little plate?" The third said, "Who has been taking my little loaf?" The fourth said, "Who has been tasting my porridge?" The fifth said, "Who has been using my little fork?" The sixth said, "Who has been cutting with my little knife?" The seventh said, "Who has been drinking from my little cup?" Then the first one, looking around, saw a hollow in his bed, and cried, "Who has been lying on my bed?" And the others came running and cried, "Someone has been on our beds too." But when the 7th looked at his bed, he saw little Snow White lying there asleep. Then he told the others, who came running up, crying out in their astonishment, and holding up their 7 little candles to throw a light upon Snow White. "Oh goodness, oh gracious," cried they, "what a beautiful child is this!" And were so full of joy to see her, that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on. And the 7th dwarf slept with his comrades, an hour at a time with each, until the night had passed. When it was morning, and Snow White awoke, and saw the 7 dwarfs, she was very frightened, but they seemed quite friendly, and asked her what her name was. And she told them, and then they asked how she came to be in their house. And she related to them how her stepmother had wished her to be put to death, and how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run the whole day long, until at last she had found their little house. Then the dwarf said, "If you will keep our house for us, and cook and wash and make the beds, and sew and knit, and keep everything tidy and clean, you may stay with us, and you shall lack nothing." "With all my heart," said Snow White, and so she stayed, and kept the house in good order. In the morning the dwarfs went to the mountain to dig for gold. In the evening they came home, and their supper had to be ready for them. All the day long the maiden was left alone, and the good little dwarfs warned her, saying, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon know you are here. Let no one into the house." Now the queen, having eaten Snow White's heart, as she supposed, felt quite sure now that she was the first and fairest, and so she came to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the glass answered, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." Then she was very angry, for the glass always spoke the truth, and she knew that the huntsman must have deceived her, and that Snow White must still be living. And she thought and thought how she could manage to make an end of her, for as long as she was not the fairest in the land, envy left her no rest. At last she thought of a plan. She painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, so that no one would have known her. In this disguise, she went across the 7 mountains until she came to the house of the 7 little dwarves, and she knocked on the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell, fine wares to sell." Snow White peeped out of the window and cried, "Good day, good woman, what have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," answered she, "laces of all colors." And she held up a piece that was woven of variegated silk. "I need not be afraid of letting in this good woman," thought Snow White, and she unbarred the door and bought the pretty lace. "What a figure you are, child," said the old woman. "Come and let me lace you properly for once." Snow White, suspecting nothing, stood up before her and let her lace her with the new lace. But the old woman laced so quick and tight that it took Snow White's breath away, and she fell down as dead. "Now you have done with being the fairest," said the old woman as she hastened away. Not long after that, towards evening, the 7 dwarfs came home and were terrified to see their dear Snow White lying on the ground without life or motion. They raised her up, and when they saw how tightly she was laced, they cut the lace in two. Then she began to draw breath, and little by little she returned to life. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old peddler woman was no other than the wicked queen. You must beware of letting anyone in when we are not here." And when the wicked woman got home, she went to her glass and said, "Looking glass against the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And it answered as before, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." When she heard that, she was so struck with surprise that all the blood left her heart, for she knew that Snow White must still be living. "But now," said she, "I will think of something that will be her ruin." And by witchcraft she made a poisoned comb. Then she dressed herself up to look like another different sort of old woman. So she went across the 7 mountains and came to the house of the 7 dwarves, and knocked at the door and cried, "Good wares to sell, good wares to sell." Snow White looked out and said, "Go away, I must not let anybody in." "But you are not forbidden to look," said the old woman, taking out the poisoned comb and holding it up. It pleased the poor child so much that she was tempted to open the door, and when the bargain was made, the old woman said, "Now for once your hair shall be properly combed." Poor Snow White, thinking no harm, let the old woman do as she would. But no sooner was the comb put in her hair than the poison began to work, and the poor girl fell down senseless. "Now, you paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman, "this is the end of you," and went off. By good luck it was now near evening, and the 7 little dwarfs came home. When they saw Snow White laying on the ground as dead, they thought directly that it was the stepmother's doing. They looked about, found the poisoned comb, and no sooner had they drawn it out of her hair than Snow White came to herself and related all that had passed. Then they warned her once more to be on her guard and never again let anyone in at the door. And the queen went home and stood before the looking glass and said, "Looking glass against the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the looking glass answered as before, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." When she heard the looking glass speak thus, she trembled and shook with anger. "Snow White shall die," cried she, "though it should cost me my own life." And then she went to a secret lonely chamber where no one was likely to come, and there she made a poisonous apple. It was beautiful to look upon, being white with red cheeks, so that anyone who should see it must long for it, but whoever ate even a little bit of it must die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and clothed herself like a peasant woman, and went across the 7 mountains to where the dwarfs lived. And when she knocked at the door, Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anybody in. The 7 dwarfs told me not." "All right," answered the woman. "I can easily get rid of my apples elsewhere. There, I will give you one." "No," answered Snow White, "I dare not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the woman. "Look here, I will cut the apple in 2 pieces. You shall have the red side. I will have the white one." For the apple was so cunningly made that all the poison was in the rosy half of it. Snow White longed for the beautiful apple, and as she saw the peasant woman eating a piece of it, she could no longer refrain, but stretched out her hand and took the poisoned half. But no sooner had she taken a morsel of it into her mouth than she fell to the earth as dead. And the queen, casting on her a terrible glance, laughed aloud and cried, "As white as snow, as red as blood, as black as ebony. This time the dwarfs will not be able to bring you back to life again." And when she went home and asked the looking glass against the wall, who was fairest of us all, at last it answered, "You are the fairest now of all." Then her envious heart had peace, as much as an envious heart can have. The dwarfs, when they came home in the evening, found Snow White lying on the ground, and there came no breath out of her mouth, as she was dead. They lifted her up, sought if anything poisonous was to be found, cut her laces, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but all was no avail. The poor child was dead, and remained dead. Then they laid her on a bier, and sat all 7 of them round it, and wept and lamented 3 whole days. And then they would have buried her, but that she looked still as if she were living, with her beautiful blooming cheeks. So they said, we cannot hide her away in the black ground. And they had made a coffin of clear glass, so as to be looked in from all sides. And they laid her in it, and wrote in golden letters upon it her name, and that she was a king's daughter. Then they set the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always remained by it to watch. And the birds came too, and mourned for Snow White. First an owl, then a raven, and lastly a dove. Now for a long while Snow White lay in the coffin and never changed, but looked as if she were asleep, for she was still as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. It happened, however, that one day a king's son rode through the wood and up to the dwarf's house, which was near it. He saw on the mountain the coffin, and beautiful Snow White within it, and then he read what was written in golden letters upon it. Then he said to the dwarfs, let me have the coffin, and I will give you whatever you would like to ask for it. But the dwarfs told him they could not part with it for all of the gold in the world. But he said, I beseech you to give it to me, for I cannot live without looking upon Snow White. If you consent, I will bring you to great honor, and care for you as if you were my brethren. When he so spoke, the good little dwarfs had pity upon him, and gave him the coffin. And the king's son called his servants, and bid him carry it away on their shoulders. Now it happened that as they were going along, they stumbled over a bush, and with the shaking of the bit of poisoned apple flew out of her throat. It was not long before she opened her eyes, threw up the cover of the coffin, and sat up alive and well. Oh dear, where am I? Cried she. The king's son answered full of joy, you are near me.
Didn't think about doing the damn look. Sorry.
So is the king her dad?
Yes. But there's probably multiple kings. So, or maybe it's her brother. Strange happened.
The king's son answered full of joy, you are near me. And relating all that had happened, he said, I would rather have you than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's castle, and you shall be my bride. And Snow White was kind, and went with him. And their wedding was held with pomp and great splendor. But Snow White's wicked stepmother was also bidden to the feast. And when she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, she went to her looking glass and said, Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all? The looking glass answered, O queen, although you are of beauty rare, the young bride is 1,000 times more fair. Then she railed and cursed, and was beside herself with disappointment and anger. First she thought she would not go to the wedding, but then she felt she should have no peace until she went and saw the bride. And when she saw her, she knew her for Snow White, and could not stir from the place for anger and terror. For they had ready red-hot iron shoes, in which she had to dance until she fell down dead. What'd you think about that?
Jesus Christ. Are you gonna make it?
Yeah. No.
It was interesting. I mean, not too far off from like the original story. Like, not that's the original story from like the Disneyized version.
Yeah.
Disneyized.
Disneyified.
But like, I think in the Disney movie they bring her out of death with true love's first kiss or whatever. And this one, they're like, oh, they dislodged the apple out of her throat and then she was good to go.
Like, what the hell? Did I say something?
No, your stomach.
Oh, that was my tummy? I didn't even notice. I haven't eaten today and it's almost 4.
It was like, and you were just like, what? Okay, so I will be reading the Cinderella version. The Cinderella version. The Grimm Brothers version of Cinderella. That's what I meant to say. Shall I just begin?
Sure do. Wow.
Who?
Huh?
Cinderella, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a rich man whose wife lay sick, and when she felt her end drawing near, she called to her only daughter to come near her bed and said, "Dear child, be pious and good, and God will always take care of you. And I will look down upon you from heaven and will be with you." And then she closed her eyes and expired. The maiden went every day to her mother's grave and wept, and was always pious and good. When the winter came, the snow covered the grave with a white covering, and when the sun came in the early spring and melted it away, the man took to himself another wife. The new wife brought 2 daughters home with her, and they were beautiful and fair in appearance, but at heart were black and ugly. And then began very evil times for the poor stepdaughter. "Is the stupid creature to sit in the same room with us?" said they. "Those who eat food must earn it. Out upon her for a kitchen maid." They took away her pretty dresses and put on old gray kirtle and gave her wooden shoes to wear. "Just look now at the proud princess, how she is decked out," cried they laughing, and then they sent her into the kitchen. There she was obliged to do heavy work from morning to night, get up early in the morning, draw water, make the fires, cook and wash. Besides that, the sisters did their utmost to torment her, mocking her and strewing peas and lentils among the ashes and setting her to pick them up. In the evenings, when she was quite tired out with her hard day's work, she had no bed to lie on, but was obliged to rest on the hearth among the cinders. And as she always looked dusty and dirty, they named her Cinderella. That's so mean. It happened one day that the father went out to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Fine clothes," said one. "Pearls and jewels," said the other. "But what will you have, Cinderella?" said he. "The first twig, father, that strikes against your hat on the way home, that is what I would like you to bring home to me." So he brought for the 2 stepdaughters fine clothes, pearls, and jewels, and on his way back, as he strode through a green lane, a hazel twig struck against his hat, and he broke it off and carried it home with him. And as he reached his home, he gave to the stepdaughters what they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the hazel twig. She thanked him, and she went to her mother's grave and planted the twig there, weeping so bitterly that the tears fell upon it and watered it, and it flourished and became a fine tree. Cinderella went to see it 3 times a day, and wept and prayed, and each time a white bird rose up from the tree, and if she uttered any wish, the bird brought her whatever she wished for. Now it came to pass that the king ordained a festival that should last for 3 days, and to which all the beautiful young women of that country were bidden, so that the king's son might choose a bride from among them. When the 2 stepdaughters heard that they too were bidden to appear, they felt very pleased, and they called Cinderella, and said, "Comb our hair, brush our shoes, and make our buckles fast. We are going to the wedding feast at the king's castle." Cinderella, when she heard this, could not help crying, for she too would have liked to go to the dance, and she begged her stepmother to allow her. "What, you, Cinderella," said she, "in all your dust and dirt you want to go to a festival? You that have no dress and no shoes, you want to dance?" But as she persisted in asking, at last the stepmother said, "I have strewed a dish full of lentils in the ashes, and if you can pick all of them up again, in 2 hours you may go with us." Then the maiden went to the back door that led to the garden, and called out, "O gentle doves, O turtle doves, and all the birds that be, the lentils that in the ashes lie, come pick up for me. The good must be put in the dish, the bad you may eat if you wish." Then there came to the kitchen window 2 white doves, and after them turtle doves, and at last a crowd of all birds under heaven, chirping and fluttering, and they alighted among the ashes, and the doves nodded with their heads and began to pick, peck, pick, peck. And then all the others soon began to pick, peck, and put all the good grains into the dish. Before an hour was over, all was done, and they flew away. Then the maiden brought the dish to her stepmother, feeling joyful, and thinking that now she should go to the feast. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no proper clothes, and you do not know how to dance, and you will be laughed at." And when Cinderella cried for disappointment, she added, "If you can pick 2 dishes full of lentils out of the ashes, nice and clean, you shall go with us," thinking to herself, "For that is not possible." When she had strewed 2 dishes full of lentils among the ashes, the maiden went through the back door into the garden and cried, "O gentle doves, O turtle doves, and all the birds that be, the lentils that in the ashes lie, come and pick up for me. The good must be put in the dish, the bad you may eat if you wish." So there came to the kitchen window 2 white doves, and then some turtle doves, and at last a crowd of all other birds under heaven, chirping and fluttering as they alighted among the ashes, and the doves nodded their heads and began to pick, peck, pick, peck. And then all the others began to pick, peck, and put all the good grains into the dish. And before half an hour was over, it was all done, and they flew away. Then the maiden took the dishes to the stepmother, feeling joyful, thinking that now she should go with them to the feast. But she said, "All this is of no good to you. You cannot come with us, for you have no proper clothes and cannot dance. You would put us to shame." Then she turned her back on poor Cinderella and made haste to set out with her 2 proud stepdaughters. And as there was no one left in the house, Cinderella went to her mother's grave under the hazel bush and cried, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me." Then the bird threw down a dress of gold and silver and a pair of slippers embroidered with silk and silver. And in all haste she put on the dress and went to the festival. But her stepmother and sisters did not know her, and thought she must be a foreign princess. She looked so beautiful in her golden dress. Of Cinderella they never thought at all, and supposed that she was sitting at home, arid picking lentils out of the ashes. The king's son came to meet her and took her by the hand and danced with her, and he refused to stand up with anyone else, so that he might not be obliged to let go of her hand. And when anyone came to claim it, he answered, "She is my partner." And when the evening came, she wanted to go home. Why would she want to go home? For real. And when the evening came, she wanted to go home, but the prince said he would go with her to take care of her, for he wanted to see where the beautiful maiden lived. But she escaped him and jumped up into the pigeon house. Then the prince waited until the father came and told him the strange maiden had jumped into the pigeon house. The father thought to himself, "It cannot surely be Cinderella," and called for axes and hatchets, and had the pigeon house cut down. But there was no one in it. When they entered the house, there sat Cinderella in her dirty clothes among the cinders, and a little oil lamp burnt dimly in the chimney. For Cinderella had been very quick, and had jumped out of the pigeon house again, and had run to the hazel bush, and there she had taken off her beautiful dress and laid it on the grave, and the bird had carried it away again. And then she had put on her little gray kirtle again, and had sat down in the kitchen among the cinders. The next day, when the festival began anew, and the parents and the stepsisters had gone to it, Cinderella went to the hazel bush and cried, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me." Then the bird cast down a still more splendid dress than the day before, and when she appeared in it among the guests, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The prince had been waiting until she came, and he took her hand and danced with her alone. And when anyone else came to invite her, he said, "She is my partner." And when the evening came, she wanted to go home, and the prince followed her, for he wanted to see what house she belonged to, but she broke away from him and ran into the garden at the back of the house. There stood a fine large tree, bearing splendid pears. She leapt as lightly as a squirrel among the branches, and the prince did not know what had become of her. So he waited until the father came, and then he told him that the strange maiden had rushed from him, and that he thought she had gone up into the pear tree. The father thought to himself, "It cannot surely be Cinderella," and he called for an axe and felled the tree, but there was no one in it. And when they went into the kitchen, there sat Cinderella among the cinders as usual, for she had got down from the other side of the tree, and had taken back her beautiful clothes to the bird on the hazel bush, and had put on her old gray kirtle again. On the third day, when the parents and the stepchildren had set off, Cinderella went again to her mother's grave, and said to the tree, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me." Then the bird cast down a dress, the likes of which had never been seen, for splendor and brilliancy, and slippers that were gold. And when she appeared in the dress at the feast, nobody knew what to say for wonderment. The prince danced with her alone, and if anyone else asked for her, he answered, "She is my partner." And when it was evening, Cinderella wanted to go home, and the prince was about to go with her, but she ran past him so quickly that he could not follow her. But he had laid a plan and had caused all the steps to be spread with pitch, so that as she rushed down them, the left shoe of the maiden remained sticking to it. The prince picked it up and saw that it was of gold and very small and slender. The next morning he went to the father and told him that none should be his bride save the one whose foot the golden shoe should fit. Then the two sisters were very glad because they had pretty feet. The eldest went to her room to try on the shoe, and her mother stood by. But she could not get her great toe into it, for the shoe was too small. Then her mother handed her a knife and said, "Cut the toe off, for when you are a queen, you will never have to go on foot."
What the fuck?
So the girl cut off her toe, squeezed her foot into the shoe, concealed the pain, and went down to the prince. Then he took her with him on his horse as his bride and rode off. They had to pass by the grave, and there sat two pigeons on the hazel bush and cried, there they go, there is blood on her shoe. The shoe is too small, not the right bride at all." Then the prince looked at her shoe and saw the blood flowing, and he turned his horse around and took the false bride back home, saying she was not the right one and that the other sister must try on the shoe. So she went into her room and got her toes comfortably in, but her heel was too large. Then her mother handed her the knife, saying, "Cut off a piece of your heel. When you are a queen, you will never have to go on foot." So the girl cut off a piece of her heel and thrust her foot into the shoe, concealed the pain, and went down to the prince, who took his bride before him on his horse and rode off. When they passed by the hazel bush, the two pigeons sat there and cried, there they go, there is blood on her shoe. The shoe is too small, not the right bride at all." When the prince looked at her foot and saw the blood was flowing from the shoe.
Dude, this mom is awful. Like telling her kids, "Cut off your limbs, it's okay."
And saw how the blood was flowing from the shoe and staining the white stocking, he turned his horse round and brought the false bride back home again. "This is not the right one," said he. "Have you no other daughter?" "No," said the man, "only my dead wife left behind her little stunted Cinderella. It is impossible that she can be the bride." But the king's son ordered her to be sent for, but the mother said, "Oh no, she is much too dirty, I could not let her be seen." But he would have her fetched, and so Cinderella had to appear. First she washed her face and hands quite clean, and went in and curtsied to the prince, who held out her golden shoe. Then she sat down on a stool and drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe and slipped it into the golden one, which fitted it perfectly. And when she stood up, the prince looked in her face. He knew again the beautiful maiden that had danced with him, and he cried, "This is the right bride." The stepmother and the two sisters were thunderstruck and grew pale with anger. But he put Cinderella before him on his horse and rode off, and as they passed the hazel bush, the two white pigeons cried, there they go, no blood on her shoe. The shoe's not too small, the right bride is she after all." And when they had thus cried, they came flying after and perched on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right and one on the left, and so remained. And when her wedding with the prince was appointed to be held, the false sisters came, hoping to curry favor and to take part in the festivities. So as the bridal procession went into the church, the eldest walked on the right side and the younger on the left, and the pigeons picked out an eye of each of them. And as they returned, the elder was on the left side and the younger was on the right, and the pigeons picked out the other eye of each of them. And so they were condemned to go blind for the rest of their days because of their wickedness and falsehood.
Holy shit. For one, I got beef with the mom.
Yeah. Just cut your toes off, you'll be fine.
But then the girls were like, okay.
Whatever you say, mother dearest.
So I hope you like our little rendition of that. Ooh. We poppin' today. Morbid. That is morbid. Yeah. I was looking up details about like the stories and stuff while you were reading, and they read those to kids in school. And I was like, what?
Yeah, and it's kind of messed up that they took like these horrible stories, because some of them are like even worse, like there's bad ones, and then they're like, we're gonna make it a cutesy little kids movie.
I just don't have words, like. So I hope you enjoyed, and like and comment and subscribe. Let us know which story you liked better. Let us know if you have heard of the Grimm Brothers. I haven't. And if you've read any of their other stories, I haven't. I don't know if I want to.
There's a TV show called Grimm, and that's where like I started hearing about them, because there's a TV show.
Do they like talk about them?
They're like, yeah, it's like it revolves around like the Grimm Brothers stories pretty much.
Creepy. And we will see you tomorrow for another spooky video.
That was my spooky hands.